Flex. Approximately 10 officers at the Elmira Correctional Facility were attacked during separate incidents at the prison over the past week. Punches, bites. Multiple officers at Elmira Correctional Facility, Elmira, NY. Multiple corrections officers were injured in an attack by an inmate this week after a relatively quiet couple of months at the Elmira Correctional Facility. On October 27, a nurse was giving medicine to inmates on the cell block. The inmate involved in the attack threw an unknown liquid at the nurse, but it missed hitting her. 2 officers were escorting the inmate to his cell on January 3 after he had been interviewed in the sergeant's office. When in the cell block, the inmate turned and punched one officer in the eye, after which he was forced to the floor by the officers. After breaking free, he punched the other officer in the eye and a sergeant in the forehead. He was forced to the ground again, and officers administered pepper spray which had no effect according to Seneca. The inmate had also put bed sheets across the bars of the cell, making it difficult to see inside. Officers responded to the incident, and the inmate charged the first officer that entered the cell, trying and failing to hit him. He charged again and hit the officer in the chest, pushing him into the cell bars. As officers tried to put handcuffs on the inmate, he headbutted another officer in the face and bit the knee of a second officer. He became compliant after being put in handcuffs. Inmate then tried to punch the second officer that entered the cell but was unsuccessful. Officers were able to put the inmate in a body hold, force him to the ground, and put him in handcuffs. 3 officers were taken to Ogden Medical Center for injuries and did not return to duty after they were released. A sergeant and 2 other officers were treated by facility staff and remained on duty. Officer stabbed, another breaks elbow after inmate attacks at Elmira Correctional Facility. Officers eventually were able to put the inmate in a body hold and put handcuffs on him. During the attack, a second inmate tried to join in. When a sergeant tried to stop him from interfering, he punched the sergeant in the side of the head, knocking him unconscious. He then ran into the mess hall and displayed a sharpened toothbrush and threatened staff. After unsuccessful attempts to knock the weapon out of his hands, the inmate lunged and stabbed an officer in the bicep. He was then taken to the ground by officers and dropped the weapon. A search of his cell revealed a second sharpened toothbrush and a metal cutting device. The officer with the fractured elbow and the officer that was stabbed were both taken to Ogden Medical Center and didn't return to duty. 2 other officers, including the one who was punched in the head and knocked unconscious, were treated by facility medical staff and remained on duty. The first inmate who attacked is serving 25 years to life after being convicted in New York County in 2018 for murder 2nd, manslaughter 1st, and arson 4th. The second inmate in the attack is serving a 27-year sentence after being convicted in Bronx County in 2016 for manslaughter 1st and attempting to promote prison contraband 1st. In 2012 he was arrested after he shot his mother in the head while she lay in bed and beat her to death with a baseball bat before disposing her body in a dumpster. Officers also found a plexiglass shank in the cell of another inmate who wasn't involved in the assaults. Both violent, vicious attacks are exactly the reason why a watered-down disciplinary system will continue to have no deterrence on unprovoked attacks. It will only get worse once HALT legislation goes into effect next year. Our elected officials who have continually advocated for these weakened policies should look these officers in the eyes so they fully understand the violence they are subjected to every day. Conceived policies only embolden an inmate who savagely shoots his mother and beats her to death with a baseball bat. That is simply unacceptable, said Mark de Burgomaster, Seneca Western Region Vice President. Elmira, NY, WETM. Multiple officers were injured in 2 inmate attacks at Elmira Correctional Facility last weekend, according to Seneca. On October 16, officials say an inmate exited his cell and initially began walking away from staff while ignoring their orders. The inmate punched one officer in the arm, which led to other officers placing him in a body hold on the floor. The inmate broke free and struck another officer underneath the chin. The inmate was placed in a body hold on the floor again where he continued to be combative, kicking, headbutting, and attempting to bite staff. OC spray was administered by 2 officers and the inmate was placed into handcuffs. The inmate was brought to the medical facility for evaluation and was transferred to a special housing unit pending disciplinary charges. The inmate, 37, is serving a 3-year sentence after being convicted in Monroe County in 2021 for attempted criminal possession of a weapon. Second, the officer who was struck in the chin sustained a 1-inch laceration and was transported to Arnott Ogden Medical Center for treatment. He received 3 stitches to close the wound. 5 other officers remained on duty after sustaining injuries ranging from shoulder pain, swollen knee, and hand swelling. 2 days following the October 16 incident, 2 officers sustained minor injuries when an inmate fought with them after he violated visiting room policies and refused to submit to a pat frisk. The inmate, 29, who is serving 33 years to life, after being convicted for murder second, attempted murder second, assault first, and criminal possession of a weapon second, became aggressive with the 2 officers after they terminated his visit. The 2 officers grabbed the inmate in a body hold when he wouldn't comply and forced him to the floor. After a brief struggle, handcuffs were applied, and the inmate became compliant. The 2 officers were treated at the facility for hand and wrist swelling, and remained on duty. Elmira Correctional Facility reopened after weekend lockdown. The Elmira Correctional Facility has reopened after a lockdown that began on September 2. The New York Department of Corrections and Community Supervision told Acting Commissioner Anthony Anuxai approved a lockdown and full search of the correctional facility as a result of an ongoing investigation and for the safety and security of the staff and incarcerated individuals. Elmira man charged with promoting prison contraband. The docs said the search has been completed and the facility has slowly reopened. Officials didn't specify the reason for the lockdown, so 18 News will continue to follow this developing story as more information becomes available. Elmira Correctional Facility inmate attacks, 7 officers injured in 2 attacks. 7 correctional officers were injured and 5 required medical treatment at a local hospital after 2 inmates violently attacked them in separate assaults last week at the Elmira Correctional Facility. According to NSCAPA, on Friday, June 4, an inmate in one of the special housing unit's showers was ordered to exit the shower by staff and allegedly refused multiple orders. Officers entered the shower and the inmate took a fighting stance against them before attempting to punch one of the officers. 2 officers grabbed the inmate in a body hold and forced him to the ground where the inmate bit one officer in the right wrist and hand. The inmate then bit the second officer in the left arm. 2 additional staff arrived and assisted in getting the inmate under control and into handcuffs. The inmate was removed from the shower and placed in a special housing unit hearing room. 2 officers were treated by facility medical staff for left knee and hip pain and swelling to their right forearm, elbow, and neck. Both officers remained on duty following treatment. The 2 officers who were bit were transported to Arnott Ogden Medical Center for treatment and were released. The inmate, 23, is serving a 14 to 16-year sentence after being convicted in Suffolk County on kidnapping second, rape first, criminal sexual act first, and sex abuse first charges in 2016. He was arrested after he and 2 fellow gang members robbed a young teenage couple, then proceeded to beat the male and rape the female. A second attack occurred on Sunday, June 6 when an inmate attacked an officer outside of the mess hall, leading to the officer sustaining a ruptured eardrum. During the afternoon meal, the inmate was given orders by staff and refused. The inmate walked out of the mess hall and 2 officers followed him. Once in the corridor, the inmate took an aggressive stance against 2 officers and OC spray was administered, but it had no effect. 1 officer grabbed the inmate in a body hold and forced him to the wall, and the inmate spun off the wall and began striking the officer in the head and body multiple times. Staff grabbed the inmate in a body hold and forced him to the ground and placed him in handcuffs. The inmate, 24, was placed in a special housing unit pending disciplinary charges. He is serving an 8-year sentence after being convicted in Orange County on criminal possession of a weapon second and attempted robbery second charges in 2018. 3 officers were transported to Arnott Ogden Medical Center for treatment. 1 officer sustained pain and swelling to his right wrist. The second officer had pain and swelling to his face and ribs. He also had ringing in his right ear and could not hear out of it and was diagnosed with a ruptured eardrum. The third officer was treated for pain and swelling to his right knee and wrist. Just last week we reported on 8 officers that were injured as a result of inmate attacks at Elmira Prison. Today, once again, we report 2 assaults that left 7 officers injured, 1 with a serious ear injury. The one attack was committed by a gang member who was convicted of brutally beating a young teenage couple and gang raping the girl when he was 17 years old. State legislators need to open their eyes to the type of violent inmate that is left in the prison population. They have no regard for anyone and will attack staff without the slightest provocation. This violence will continue until they realize all they have done with their progressive agenda is put our members at risk, stated Mark de Burgomaster, Niskapa Western Region Vice President. NYSCOPBA has noted that more than 80% of inmates housed in maximum security facilities like Elmira are convicted of violent felony offenses. Incidents of inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-staff assaults have been at some of the highest ever levels over the past few years. April 15. Approximately 10 officers at the Elmira Correctional Facility were attacked during separate incidents at the prison over the past week. More than 80% of inmates housed in maximum security facilities like Elmira are convicted of violent felony offenses. Incidents of inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-staff assaults have been at some of the highest ever levels over the past few years. According to a press release from the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association, 2 inmates attacked officers in separate medical emergencies after the officers responded to help the inmates inside their cells at the maximum security prison. An officer on rounds noticed an inmate inside his cell unresponsive from an apparent drug overdose. The officer entered the cell and administered Narcan. Initially, the Narcan did not work. It was administered 3 more times by staff before the inmate began breathing on his own. Inmate was transported to a local hospital for further treatment. Prior to being released from the hospital, the inmate began being disruptive. Inside the hospital room, the inmate headbutted an officer who attempted to turn off an alarm the inmate set off. He began fighting with officers as they attempted to subdue him. It took multiple officers to get him under control and into handcuffs. He continued to be combative as he was transported back to the facility. The inmate, 28, is serving a 17 years to life sentence after being convicted of murder. Flex. 4 correctional officers and a sergeant were hospitalized Monday after a riot broke out in the mess hall of a maximum security prison in Seneca County, union officials said. The big riot began Monday afternoon when 2 inmates refused to follow directions from 3 officers working in the mess hall at 5 Points Correctional Facility in Romulus, the union officials with the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association said Wednesday in a news release. The officers grabbed one of the inmates in a body hold and began dragging him towards the exit, officials said. The officers wrestled the big inmate to the ground outside the mess hall, where he continued to struggle, they said. Another inmate jumped up from a table crazy in the mess hall and ran towards the exit, officials said. Guards grabbed him and forced him against a wall, backed him down. Multiple inmates then stood up and approached guards in a threatening manner. Gang, officials said. 3 inmates grabbed 2 officers near the exit door, and another officer was punched in the head when he tried to help, according to the release. An inmate grabbed another officer, slammed him into a handrail and punched him in the head, officials said. Another inmate then hit the officer and knocked him unconscious, they said. Sleep pepper spray was used and 3 of the inmates stopped fighting, officials said. 1 inmate continued to attack guards, punching and kicking them in the face hard. The pepper spray was used again and the inmate eventually stopped resisting, officials said. All inmates involved in the incident were placed in handcuffs and removed from the mess hall, according to the release. 4 of the inmates were transferred to Elmira Correctional Facility and placed in special housing units pending disciplinary charges, according to the release. The whole 3 other inmates were transferred to Attica Correctional Facility and placed in special housing units pending disciplinary charges, officials said. The 3 inmates accused of inciting the riot were placed in special housing units at 5 Points pending disciplinary charges, officials said. 3 officers were treated by prison medical staff for shoulder and lower back pain, officials said. They returned to work after being treated, according to the release. 3 officers and a sergeant were taken to Geneva Hospital for injuries to their jaws, heads, knees and for abrasions, officials said. The officer who was knocked unconscious was taken to Cayuga Medical Center for a concussion. He was later released from the hospital.